Hey there, welcome to the Snakebird podcast. My name's Josh.
And I'm Steve.
Together we invite you to join us
as we explore the mysteries of Scripture,
the realm of God,
and freedom through Christ.
So spread out your wings
and slither in place.
Because this is Snakebird. Hey, welcome listeners. We're glad that you're joining us today for what I would call a special edition of the Snakebird podcast. In all of our time together, our goal is to look at life as a whole through the lens of a snakebird, and in wisdom and gentleness take application from the things that we observe, especially biblical principles and characters. So today, we're excited to bring you something completely new. Check this out.
Who do you think you are?
Who? So, tell us about yourself. Who are you?
Who are you?
You.
No, not me, you.
Yes, I am you.
Just answer the questions. Who are you?
Now, say my name.
That's right. Welcome to this special edition of Snakebird Profiles, asking, who are you? Taking a look at some individual character in the Bible. Stephen, who are we profiling today?
He is the man, but no legend. We are talking about David. Yes, David who slew Goliath. This is King David who we will be examining for this first Snakebird profile.
You know, talk about starting on a small scale, right? I think when we were talking and I was preparing for this, I'm like, he's kind of like the biggest Bible character you can choose outside of Jesus, because there's like 2.5 Bible books that refer to him. And of course, we know him for so many different reasons. And I want to remind our listeners that as we do these profiles, what we're hoping to pull out of them is examining the highs and lows of their lives, and then what we can learn from how they reacted or what they did or what they didn't do. And so as we go, King David is, of course, going to be the first of many that we'll look at. But I'd like to start talking about David because, I mean, he's kind of got that giant thing that happens in his life. And then, of course, some other things. And I thought, what better way to start with King David than to identify him by some of the different titles that he has? Because, you know, we live in an age where everybody talks about, oh, my title is doctor, my title is professor, my title is worker, architect, whatever it might be. King David, over the course of his life, it almost seems like he had his hand in virtually kind of anything that he was doing. So I'll start us off. One of his titles, kind of a cool one, he was a warrior.
He was a warrior. And then since we're talking about highs and lows, he was also a nobody shepherd boy at one point.
That's right, yeah. Okay, this is one of my favorites because of all the songs and music that he wrote. He was a poet.
Yes, he was a great musician.
Yeah, he could shred.
He could shred the guitar and settle fits from King Saul. I mean, he was pretty good.
Yeah. I would love to see like what a lyre, you know, the instrument that he played looked like in the hands of this kid, this harp or whatever he was out there working on.
It would be akin to Stevie Ray Vaughan's pick guard, I imagine. You know, just so much wear. All right.
Yes, okay.
All right, continuing.
All right.
He was a great hunter as well. He slew a lion and a bear. I mean, think about what that would have took.
Yeah. He ended up being a man of war, or even like a general.
Yeah. And he ran for his life at times.
Yeah, a fugitive.
Yeah.
He was an armor bearer.
He was. He was a philanthropist at one point.
Okay, you lost me. No, that means, for those of you out there, that means somebody who gives. And there's a really neat story where he helps out a friend of his son named Mephibosheth, and try to say that 6 times fast.
Yeah. Which is a really crazy, it's an awesome story. We'll get into it.
He was a man of faith.
He was. And then there was a darker side of David.
Yeah.
That if you keep reading throughout Scripture, you will come to the point where he meets Bathsheba in an unfortunate way, and you find out he's an adulterer.
Mm-hmm. And going down that path eventually led him to become a murderer.
Yeah. And it's crazy because it doesn't matter who you are. Likely you're going to be able to relate to David at some point in his life.
Yeah.
And there's so many ups and downs. Some people say, I'm no saint, but I'm not a murderer. David was both.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
in a sense, but
And even looking at his life again for application, we see that because of the way that he went, he also became a bad parent.
Yeah.
He neglected to deal with some issues that were happening with his kids.
He had a bad relationship with his wife as well at a time.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you know that he was also a DoorDash delivery boy?
You're kidding.
I can establish it. It's biblical. I know
You're
it
gonna
sounds
have
crazy.
to give me an address with that one.
I'm not sure if he worked for Postmates or DoorDash, but he was definitely doing that for a couple instances. You know what my favorite title for David is, though?
What's that?
And this is so God, because it's mentioned in the Bible before he even is known. Before we even know about who David is. It's in 1 Samuel 13. When Saul, David's predecessor, is doing some crazy stuff, God says, we've moved on. The kingdom is going to be taken away from your hands now. And I'm going to go after an individual who has a heart after God's. And he was called a man after God's own heart.
Yeah, it's quite a title.
And I think it really is, because I think over all of his life, whether it was the highs or the lows, the good or the bad, I think that was the rudder that always led him back. Even when he sinned, even when he fell, always led him back to following hard after what God had. And why we can call his reign in Israel, or his life, such a success, was that because he was a man that kept coming back after God's heart.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
And so, okay, so we're looking at that. I think we should start with a small story about David, one that involves a giant. What do you think?
Yeah. Very good. Yes, everyone has likely heard of David and Goliath. If you went to Sunday school as a kid, it's probably one of the first characters that you had heard of. But yeah, let's get into that. David, he was kind of a nobody shepherd boy, one of 8 sons by a man named Jesse out in the country.
Yeah.
And he got brought into the presence of King Saul. And how did that kind of lead into this big battle day where David got introduced to this situation?
Well, okay, so, you never know when God has his hands on somebody. And it was obvious from the moment that we meet David that he's something special. And I love the story of Samuel showing up, where he's just come off this disappointment of this failure of Saul, who seemed like he had it all together. It's this dude who's good looking, it says, and head and shoulders above the rest of Israel. I mean, he should have been the center on the basketball team if they had basketball back then. And Samuel is probably so discouraged because he's coming off of this dude who failed so epically that God said, no, we're replacing you. We tried it Israel's way. We went for the guy that was the best looking. We went for the guy that looked like he had all this stuff together. We're going to go with somebody else. And remember, Samuel showed up, and the minute he saw David's oldest brother, Samuel was like, yes, God, this is the man. And God goes, no.
Yeah.
What do? I look at the heart, and I don't look at the appearance, the outward appearance. And my friend tells this story, and I love the way he tells it, is that they get, and it's number 1. No, that's not him. Number 2, no, that's not him. Number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7. And then finally, Samuel's like, guys, we are not eating until I anoint this king. And they're like, is there anyone else? And they're like, there's David. Oh my gosh, that kid's annoying. And he's out in the field. And Samuel's like, we're not sitting down to eat the barbecue until you get him. And then finally David comes and he's like, all like, what do you guys want? And he wasn't even thought of. And the next thing you know, he's being anointed as the king of Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that had to have been quite a deal to be walking in from the pasture, tending to the livestock, and you got your brother Jason Momoa over there that just got rejected by Samuel, and he's like, no, this is the dude.
I'm Aquaman.
So yeah, it's quite a situation if you picture it. David, he's the least of his brothers in his father's house, and he's the one. He's the one.
Yeah, and then almost immediately he's called into service by King Saul, because Saul, at this point, he's starting to go a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah.
He is having trouble relaxing. He's got a distressed spirit, and they call David in as a musician. And anytime that he's playing, it's like the Spirit of the Lord is moving through him, and it's causing Saul to get some relief from whatever is bothering him. And so David's able to relieve that. And I bring you to the first instance where David is a DoorDash deliverer, because it says that David, in verse 20 of chapter 16, says, "And Jesse took a donkey, loaded it with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them by his son David to Saul." Ding dong. That's DoorDash right there. That's Uber Eats.
I see now.
Because,
I
you
see
know,
it.
he was taking food. Okay, I might have gone way too far for that joke to land, but I'm hoping that you're laughing, listener, because it made some sense to me. Because he does it again in the next chapter where all of a sudden the Israelites, we're going to get to the story, the Israelites are at war with the Philistines. And of course, we know that there's this giant who comes out and he's challenging them, and he's saying, let's do one-on-one combat. And so Jesse tells David, he says, hey, take these 10 blocks of cheese to your brothers and report to me what happens from the battle line. So once again,
Yeah.
Uber Eats. I'm just saying.
I mean,
okay, so
Yeah.
we're here. We're
Well
finally
done.
at the good story. We're at the climax of what happens, or we're at the lead up. What happens next?
Well, you know, David, he's still he's doing his shepherd thing and all that. And his dad's like, you know, bring your brother some food. So he's heading over there, and basically the scene is he walks up on them at this standoff, these two armies, and then Goliath's over there just hurling your mom jokes at Israel, just, you know, tearing them down, just making fun of them.
Foul,
And, yeah,
just
yeah.
nasty.
Yeah, you guys are worthless, just completely going at them. And David, basically, he hears this, and he sees Israel sitting there not doing anything about it. And he's like, what are you guys doing? We are Israel. We are God's chosen people. And this uncircumcised Philistine is, you know, got his foul mouth flapping. What are you guys doing? We are God's people. So David's got this zeal, and everyone's probably looking at him like, you shut up, kid. You know,
His indignation
Yeah.
at this is so cool. And then his brother's like, well, you just brought your popcorn to see the show.
yeah, yeah.
But he is literally going, who is this uncircumcised Philistine to stand against the Most High God?
Yeah.
But you think about it, I mean, looking at it from a human standpoint, Goliath, we estimate, was over 9 feet tall.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it wasn't like, you know, I don't know. I mean, they tried to make that same reference, or in the movie Troy, where they were like yelling Achilles, and it was this huge dude.
Yeah.
And, but it's like one of the things that I'd love to see the recording of in heaven,
Yeah.
of what this little shepherd boy looked like in reference to this giant warrior.
Yeah, I imagine it was a pretty grave situation, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is no joke. This is a seasoned warrior, a guy that there's no telling how many people he's killed. And David basically comes up and he says, I'll do it.
Yeah. And then there's even kind of some rewards on the table, a loot box, if you would, on the table from Saul, going, hey, anybody that does this,
Yeah.
they get to marry my daughter, and they don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah, you say a loot box, like an instrument?
No, I was thinking like for the kiddos that play video games.
Oh, I was thinking a lyre, like a harp. My bad. I was like, here's a custom Les Paul.
Yeah,
for the- My bad.
I was trying to like meet up with the kids who are probably never going to listen to this podcast, but I was thinking like Loot Crate or something. So, okay. Yeah, King Saul is making this huge offering, and that wasn't really the appeal to David at all.
No.
What he wanted to do was he wanted to say, hey, I'm gonna see that this dude gets shut up because of who God is in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was, you know, David was curious why they didn't feel the same way.
Yeah.
And so basically Saul's like, all right, if you're going to do this, here's some armor. And so they go through the whole deal where David tries to put that on, and that doesn't work. It's pretty heavy because he's a scrawny little kid.
And even the way that he says it is like, I've never worked in this armor. I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah.
So David, he goes out there, and I love what he takes with him, because he takes his shepherd's staff, and he takes his merce, his man bag. No, he takes his pouch, and then he goes down to a brook, and he pulls out 5 smooth stones.
Yeah.
And then he comes to this Philistine. And Goliath looks at him and he goes, "What? You send me a dog?"
Yeah. I mean, and this is like I said, a very serious situation, because if I remember correctly, the winner of this one-on-one shindig, that means that army wins. It does it not?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It was playing for keeps.
oh yeah, this is like Pinks.
Yeah.
Someone's walking away with the whole money bag here.
See, I went young and you went really old. So, and I mean,
It's still a show.
yeah. No. Oh, okay. I was thinking, man, what did I think? I was thinking of, Grease Lightning or whatever.
Oh no, Pink Slips.
Yeah.
If they
yeah.
race their. Oh, okay. Well,
They do
there's
that
a
in-
modern show.
They do that in Greece. Remember? That's okay. I'm sorry. That's how manly I am, as I had to reference a musical.
I liked
We're
Grease.
playing for Pinks, man. So I love that David doesn't even take a sword, because he's like, the way that God works, I'll have one in a second. I'm going to borrow Goliath.
Oh, that's
I mean,
that's insane. That's
Yeah.
insane thinking.
yeah, he's like, I don't even need a sword. I'm going to have this dude's in a minute.
Yeah.
And he goes down there, and Goliath's like, I mean, okay, I have to read it because it's one of my favorite like speeches. You know, if you're talking about like epic battle speeches, I think of Gladiator.
Yeah.
You know, I am Maximus Aurelius, you know, and
Yeah.
and
Kings of the armies of the north.
yes, husband to a murdered wife,
Yeah.
father to a murdered son, and I will have my revenge, or whatever, you know. What we do in this life echoes in eternity.
Yeah, this is basically David in a higher pitched voice fixing this coming up.
Yeah, I mean, from a teenager. He said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." And that was it. He was like,
Yeah. Talk about a faith.
Yeah.
Right there.
yeah,
Because I don't know if it's my old age or what, but as an older person, I start, dissecting the situation and being like, what happens if this doesn't work? David he has full faith in God.
Yeah.
And he approaches the situation.
And I think it's neat how much this story has made it into pop culture.
Yeah.
But I also think it's tragic, because I also believe that to a degree it's lessened the amount of faith that is in play of this versus just the tiny guy versus the big guy.
Yeah.
Because that's the way we look at it, is like, okay, now a mom and pop like grocery store is now the David versus Walmart, who's the Goliath.
Yeah.
But it's really, to me, it's not about I was going to say the size of the dog in the fight, but it's the size of the fight in the dog. It's really, when I think about it, it's the shepherd versus the giant. But what he doesn't realize is, while the giant's looking at this little shepherd boy, he doesn't realize that behind David is the shepherd.
Yeah. That's
God,
true.
the king, like the one who rules everything. And you've just defiled him. You've called his kids names. You've spit in their faces. You've cursed at them.
Yeah. And he's sitting over there in full, body armor with the spear, the whole shebang.
Yeah. weighing upwards of 100 pounds of armor and gear and everything.
Yeah, with one little design flaw at the head region, about
Yeah.
the size of a wombat
Yeah.
hole. And
Well, that's the thing, is he thinks I'm invincible.
yeah,
And we know that through a series of crazy events, which we might eventually talk about, Gath was a place where giants were.
yeah,
I mean, his brother was a giant.
true story.
And so they just had this, like, we're invincible mentality.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy, because that's what the enemy often thinks. And that's why God is so great. And that's why faith is so important.
Yeah, and that's how God gets the glory. He has these situations where he's like, this is the kind of God that I am.
Yeah.
Not for his benefit, but for us to see.
Yeah. And I think we need to apply this story in so many ways, especially in our daily lives, where we're not necessarily going out. And I as a man, it's like, I wish that I could go out with a slingshot against a giant.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, that might be not easier, but it might be easier to draw the line of how things are. But we have to walk by faith in every circumstance, whether it's maybe it's a medical procedure, or maybe it's a diagnosis that somebody's received, or maybe it's a financial move, or maybe it's a step of faith going, hey, I'm going to step into a different type of ministry, or I'm going to talk to my coworker about Jesus for the first time, or my friend at school, whatever it might be. These are all things that, like David, we have to have that faith that God is going to be with us,
Yeah.
and that the battle's already his.
And that type of faith attracts the eyes of everyone around you.
Yeah.
Because David, he walked into the situation. He says, why are you guys standing around? You're not doing something, I will. He did. And then I think it's at that point when that rock sails through the air and pops Goliath and he hits the ground. Then David does exactly what he said he was going to do. He goes, cuts the dude's head off. I think at that point, everyone in Israel's army is just looking at each other and like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Something's going on here.
Well, and isn't it so cool that it's a rallying cry?
Yeah.
Because the next thing you know, I mean, again, I want to picture this, or I want to see the image of it, but it seems like all of the armies of Israel are just like, now they're juiced.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're like, we can win. We just systematically won.
Yeah.
But the Philistines didn't even live up to their side of the bargain. 4 pinks.
Yeah.
They were like, we're out.
Yep.
We gone. And so the next thing you know, it becomes a pursuit. And I don't know if you know this, but David gets ahead. Literally, he starts wearing Goliath's head on his belt. So they're pursuing, and God used this for a victory. And that's what I think we can take away from that too about our faith, is that when we act out in faith and other people see that victory in our lives, sometimes that will spur them on to move forward.
Yeah. And that's the amazing part of this particular story is David put his faith completely in God. God made that kind of move through it. And that led to an area where David could have started getting a big head. No play on words intended there, but he really could have. He could have gotten really arrogant because they were singing quite a tune whenever he was entering Jerusalem with Saul. Didn't they?
Yeah, he was on the top 40.
Yeah. What was that tune they were singing?
Well, they at first Saul loved it because it started with his name.
Yeah.
And it said, Saul has slain his thousands. And he was like, I love that refrain.
Yeah, you're right, I'd have.
It was bigger than Old Town Road. And then, but then they came in with the next one that said, but David has slain his tens of thousands.
Ooh, there it is.
Yeah. And for a guy that already has shaky ground, where he's already not self-confident and he's already questioning everything that's going on and looking at everyone around him going, hey, you're not on my team.
Yeah.
That really shook him to his core.
Yeah. This was a turning point in 2 ways. One, Israel in broad daylight saw David, what God did through David, and then Saul saw how they started looking at David.
Yeah.
So this is 2 major turning points.
Yeah, and from there, he tries to play him.
Yep.
He sends him out on these missions hoping he's going to die.
Yeah. he's sending him to battle constantly.
Yeah.
Just trying to get him, maybe send him to the front lines. He'll get whacked, and I had a good warrior for a while, but he won't be competition anymore.
And then David's like, hey, we're not rich, and I'm supposed to marry your daughter. I don't have a dowry.
Yeah.
That mission, we're not even going to get into that because it's a little gross. But
Yeah.
the suicide mission that Saul thinks that he's sending him on is even insane.
Oh, yeah.
And yet David, he more than doubles what Saul's asking for,
Yeah.
which is hilarious.
Yeah. It's everything that he throws at David, because David's got God on his side. It's just the tables are turning.
Yeah.
At each time.
Yeah. And then, of course, he straight up tries to kill him.
Yeah.
David is back in his presence, trying to soothe him with the harp or lyre or Old Testament guitar.
Yeah.
And he straight up throws a spear at him
Yeah.
a couple times.
Yeah. And David, he's befriended Saul's own son, Jonathan.
Yeah.
And even Jonathan is recognizing, David he's God's anointed.
Yeah, which is crazy. Another great application is that when you see God moving in someone else's life, that you shouldn't stand in the way and that you shouldn't necessarily be jealous, but you should pour into them. And we at times need to be like Jonathan, where if anyone had a reason to hate David, it would have been Jonathan, because he should have been the crown prince.
Yeah. That's just as much competition for Jonathan as it was Saul.
Yeah.
More so.
Yeah. And yet we find him saying, no, you're going to be king one day.
Yeah. We can take a lot away from Jonathan. in
Yeah,
that.
we need to have the heart of Jonathan.
Yeah.
And so David flees, and it's kind of interesting because it correlates with the story about Jesus and the disciples or the apostles eating on the Sabbath, because David goes and he gets the bread
Yeah.
from the priest, and he gets Goliath's sword, which has just been chilling there. And then
That's right.
He ends up fleeing to Gath, which is not the best idea. He gets there and they're like, wasn't this the dude that killed Goliath? And so he has to act crazy, which I have no idea why he went there, other than just it was the first place and the furthest away from Saul that he could think of.
Yeah.
And Saul ends up killing all those priests, which is just more indicative of how far he had strayed from what he originally was supposed to be. And
David basically becomes a cross-country runner here.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going from place to place running. And he fought all those battles with all those warriors by his side, and he kind of got a little following with them. Mm-hmm. He had about 600 men that were kind of going along with him as he fled.
It's the start of his wilderness period, 400 men.
Oh, 400.
Yeah, and we've talked about this. I mean, those guys, I think it's so interesting because they were the down and outers, and they were the ones that were really unhappy with the way things were, but they came out and they said, we want to be involved with what's going on. We see that you have a different heart.
Yeah.
And
even as David's fleeing, he still has a heart for people and for God, because there's a town named Keilah that's being raided by the Philistines while he's on the run, and he's like, hey, wait a minute, God, can I go help, please? And God's like, go for it. And so he goes down there and he delivers the city.
Yeah.
On the run.
And his heart is so expressed in the Psalms as he's writing, like, God, here I am, just be with me, protect me, protect our lives, because we're on the run and we know that you're still in control. And that was one of the things that encourages me from David, is that even in the midst of him having these difficulties, he's still worshiping. He hasn't forsaken God or ran out on him or felt like vice versa, that God has forgotten him.
Yeah.
And he has times where he asks God, like, what is going on? But he's truthful with God. And I think that's one of the most awesome things, is that David was able to admit at times that he was anxious, or he was depressed, or he was angry, or he was frustrated.
Yeah.
But it always came back to that sense that, okay, God, I know you're in control, and I know you're going to work this out for one reason or another.
Yeah. And it's tempting even for us when we're going through a storm. And likely none of us have gone through a storm like David was, where you're literally running across the country trying not to get killed by this army.
Yeah.
And it's tempting for us to say, you know what, I just don't got the time or energy to worship. It's not in me. I don't got it. But if we are like David, I've heard from a lot of people that have gone through hard times that they do take the time to get right with God and worship him righteously through hard times. And it's the closest they've ever been to God.
That's very true. I mean, a lot of times when we're going through the most difficult thing, God is the closest.
And he needs to be the first thing we run to, no matter what we're feeling.
Yes, please don't let feelings dictate where you run. Let the truth dictate where you run.
Yeah.
You know, David had a couple of interesting opportunities during this wilderness time. I think God, not necessarily testing him, but was allowing to see his heart. Because at 2 different times, Saul showed up, and he must have had the worst guards.
Yeah.
But 2 times, David had the opportunity to take Saul out.
Yeah. I mean, talk about the irony here. David's on the run, and him and his, hundreds of men find this cave. It's a big cave. And they're chilling at the very back of it in the shadows. And what do you know? Saul rolls up with his army, and he's like, I got to go take a pee. So he says, there's a good cave for it. You see a man about a horse, right? So he heads into the cave, and he's relieving himself, the Bible tells us. And David's men are whispering, they're like, God has given him. He's to you. I mean, this is your time. And so David, he's sitting there, and he sneaks up on Saul, but not to kill him like he's being urged to. He takes a little snippet off his robe. What happens next?
Yeah, both times he confronted Saul, and the sad thing is both times Saul said, I've sinned. I messed up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pursue you anymore.
Yeah.
And yet, both times, it wasn't true.
Yeah.
It was liar, liar, pants on fire.
Yeah, he holds us. This is a piece of your clothes. I was this close to you.
Yeah.
I could have slit your throat.
Yeah, and for a second, he's like, oh, David, you're the more honorable man.
Yeah.
You could have taken the kingdom right then.
Yeah.
And yet David said, that's not right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do the right thing the wrong way.
I think that speaks to the heart that Saul had. There's a type of heart that they're sorry because they got caught.
Yeah.
They're not sorry because their heart changed.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the Lord, we did this in your name crowd.
I think of even like the stick a needle in my eye kind of people. It's like, I'll never lie again. And then, of course, and lying, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But what we have to do is choose to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that David, even though it would have been the right thing, it was still the wrong way. And I think people have to realize that there are times when you can find vindication for who you are, but when it means throwing somebody else under the bus or tarnishing your character by achieving what you want, it's not right.
That's true.
And he was willing to say, okay, God's on my side. I'm not gonna defame myself just because of King Saul.
Yeah. And that took a lot of wisdom on David's part, because there's other instances in the Bible where that could have been a way God was letting David take the throne.
Yeah.
But David was tuned into God's heart, and he said, no, this isn't his timing. I know I'm the anointed king to come, but this isn't his timing, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. And we chose a big Bible character here.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is probably a great place to kind of wrap up this talk. And I'd like to come back next time and do David part 2, because
we're going to have to do it part 2.
I spent way too much time on David and Goliath, but it's such an awesome story. You can't help to.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to do,
if we're going to do it justice, we got to do it all the way.
Yeah. So why don't we finish with just some application? We've talked about faith.
Yeah.
We've talked about representing yourself right. We've talked about still calling out to God when you're depressed or frustrated or alone or any type of circumstances, but not relying on your feelings. What other application as we close do you see that you'd like to share?
Well, the one big one I just mentioned, waiting on God's timing. From the time Samuel confirmed that David was going to be the king to the time he actually became king, there was a lot of stuff that happened.
Yeah.
A lot of times that David could have seized the moment and tried to become king, but David didn't do that. He didn't act impulsively. He didn't do anything outside of God's timing. And that is a hard thing. I don't care who you are. Waiting is not fun.
Yeah.
And so waiting on God's timing would be a major one that I see so far.
Yeah. And I see that in relationships.
Yeah.
I see that in possibly life choices, whether it's like education or whether it's making a move, whatever it might be. Think about it. David had a promise of what God wanted to do in his life.
Yeah.
He had to carry that with him for over a decade.
Yeah.
I think, if I remember right, it was somewhere between 13 to 17 years.
That's wild.
From the time that he was anointed to the time that he was actually established as king.
Yeah. That's a lot of time to wait.
Yeah.
And, I have to say that,
I just was thinking of Psalm 27.
yeah,
Where he says, wait on the Lord. I mean, he encourages it. He goes, like, whatever you do, wait on the Lord. And I think,
Yeah.
that came from that.
yeah, that's great. Another thing I'd like to take away on part one here is do it your way. Now, I'm going to give
What? No.
yeah, I'm going to give a disclaimer. Don't worry. The way God has it for you. When David decided that he was going to go up against Goliath, Saul said, all right, but if you're going to do this, here, wear my armor. And he tried to put on the armor. It didn't fit. It didn't fit. So David did it his way, the way God had for him. And I can't help but give you a quote that's really hit my heart over the years by Peter John Corson. He says, there will be King Sauls in your life, men and women, that will say, do it the way I would do it. Here, wear my armor. But if the armor doesn't fit, don't wear it. Not out of arrogance, but by God's grace, I'll do it my way. And I think that is so important to just grab hold of and make your own, because each of us, our relationship with God is a unique fingerprint. There's a collective, but there's an individual. And you should do it the way God has it planned for you, in His grace, His timing. So those are some major things that I see in this part one.
Yeah, I think there's pigeonholes and carbon copy instructions that people try to follow.
Yeah, formulas.
Yeah, even in church growth or in personal growth, that it's like, well, you have to do it this way because this is how I did it and this was what worked for me. Mm-hmm. You have to get up and read your Bible at 5 a.m. every day for 3 hours or whatever it might be. And while that might work for that person, and it might work exceptionally well, it may not be the thing that you connect with.
Exactly.
Maybe your thing is, hey, I'm a night owl, and I connect with God way better at night, and my mind is a lot clearer, and I have a lot more time to pray. Whatever it might be, that path, you can't let somebody just set you on necessarily. You have to do it the way that God calls you to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And David is a perfect example of that. And I love the armor bearer that story because of him being like, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look what God did.
Yeah. He went out there and, just kids shepherd attire and a sling, and he took down a seasoned veteran giant warrior.
And God knew how it was going to work out. But to me, the carnage of if David lost because he wore the armor.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Think
about that.
Nasty.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because down the line, Jesus is from David's lineage.
Yeah.
So there would have been a massive shift in the plan had David worn the other, Saul's armor.
Time for plan B.
yeah. God's like, don't worry, I got this.
Yeah.
So, what an awesome application. What an awesome half a profile.
Yeah.
Because, again, we chose a Bible character who has so much to talk about. And we're not even into when he's been crowned king yet. And so come back next time, please, because we believe that there's more to say and there's more to acknowledge and encourage and exhort and learn from, all those things. And so we want to ask, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this podcast and then connect with us. You can connect with us on Facebook. You can also connect to us by our website, which is beasnakebird.com. And if you want to send us an email, go ahead and send us an email at connect@beasnakebird.com. We'd love to hear anything that you have to say, like feedback or
Any topics that
yeah.
you want us to get into, and if this podcast has done well for you, please share it with your friends on social media or however, because our goal is to move forward to the Snakebird podcast and discover the truth.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So always remember, whatever you do,
Wherever you go,
no matter what life throws at you,
there's never been a better time to follow the words of Jesus.
and
Be
be
a
a
snakebird.
snakebird.